All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here with Onar from Norway, and we're going to be discussing various things, starting off with Diana West, and her book is called The Red Thread. I've pulled up a video here about the American betrayal, but the red thread is the idea that there's something a little deeper going on behind the scenes with the Trump everybody trying to take Trump down, and there might be some deeper connections. And is it all just conspiracy theory, and how should objectivists think about these sort of topics? So Onar, what do you think is going on here? What should we say about all this?
Well, I think that we have to address the first thing that everyone is going to say, which is that, well, obviously this is a conspiracy theory, and therefore it can be easily dismissed. I think that conspiracy theories is a genuine concern that something is just a conspiracy theory. So let's try to place that. And since we've been talking dim, why not talk about that in relation to dim? So conspiracy theories is like misintegration. It's a classic example of a misintegration. And creationism is in fact one example of a conspiracy theory. Where you think that God secretly designed the world to look just like evolution, but secretly it's actually created. So that's a conspiracy theory, and so you're thinking about some kind of big, very powerful entity who works behind the scene. Now, the main idea behind almost all conspiracy theories is the idea of omnipotence. Like, it does actually come from religion. In other words, it's very often religious people or people who have a religious inclination or a religious instinct that fall for conspiracy theories. So if you tend to believe that there is an almighty power watching you and sort of fiddling with the world, it's not a big leap for you to think that there might be very powerful people working behind the scenes doing the same thing. So, generally speaking, I'm very skeptical of conspiracy theories because they don't work in practice. It's very hard to keep secrets. It's very hard to organize anything, even when you're trying to do something out in the open. Just look at the incompetence of the government when they're trying to do something that they're actually saying they're going to do. There's no secret about it. And even despite the fact that they're trying their best to do something, they fail at what they're trying to do, and they're not keeping any secrets. And so if you add on the additional complexity of trying to do it's something organized by state power, but doing it in secret as well, it just increases the complexity and difficulty very highly. So therefore, we can easily dismiss most conspiracy theories. And the D-types say, therefore, there are no patterns to behavior. There's nothing to see here. Move along. You never have to worry about any kind of structured or systematic organized behavior of any sort, because it's always a conspiracy theory. That's a D-type. The integrated view is that if a swarm of grasshoppers comes your way, they may not be in on a big conspiracy, but it sure looks like it. Like they're acting, it just happened to have the same idea, because they think alike, because they're very similar, and they so seem to be acting in unison. They may not actually be acting in unison, but we can still describe it as kind of wave or an organized or systematic or structured behavior.
All right. It's a swarm. Well, for an example on the government incompetence thing, I don't know how far. I don't know if the locusts thing works for the Soviet problem, because they are very conscious entities, and the locusts are not particularly conscious. But with government incompetence, one might be tempted to say that at least we were able to beat Hitler. You know, the government can't do much, but at least it fought a war against Hitler in Japan. It can do something, right? But if we take our hypothesis seriously, then we would say that something must have gone wrong even fighting Hitler then. There must have been some stumbling because the government can't deliver. Whatever it tries to do, it's incompetent at delivering it. And if we do look into it with Diana West, we find that the Soviets had infiltrated our government and were advising our government on what to do. So we were fighting the Soviets' war for them and then handing them half of Europe at the end of it. And they were quite well equipped with a lot of factories and equipment that we gave to them, outright gave to them. And the reason for that, it turns out, might be Soviet infiltration. We might not have given them all that stuff if it weren't for them infiltrating the upper echelons of our government. And
they also acted on behalf of China, handing victory to Mao Zedong over Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan. So that we were giving them Chiang Kai-shek weapons to fight Mao, but I think it's Diane West who had this in her book, either that or it was Ann Coulter. I'm not sure which one of those, but she documented that the main guy, the top guy who was the main diplomat in China, he was a communist. And he advised America, this Mao guy, he's a very democratic guy. He loves peace and he loves freedom. So this Chiang Kai-shek guy, he's a nationalist, very bad. So we ended up not giving Chiang Kai-shek the support he needed and basically handed Mao Zedong the victory. So that too came down to the actions of one single individual, which was a communist infiltrator, which was the diplomat in China. So conspiracies work when they are when it's actually a government, a foreign government trying to do like infiltrations and stuff. Those are, in one sense, conspiracies, but we know that they're real. Every government does this. And we know that they are to some degree successful. I mean, because everyone does it. This is well documented. So I wouldn't call this a conspiracy theory. The thing that was so bad is that FDR, he was the one that laid the ground for this to happen. He wasn't, you can say that he was a communist. He wasn't really a communist. He was just a progressive. So he was very, very sympathetic to communism and to fascism, because Mussolini kept the trains running on time, right?
Well, plus, until World War II broke out, we didn't know it was all going to go downhill like that. So until 1939, everything was fun and games, and FDR was jealous of Stalin's dictatorship, Hitler's dictatorship, Mussolini's dictatorship. Everybody had a dictatorship but FDR.
He tried to put in all his cronies in the Supreme Court, but he was struck down. So he was really feeling that he was being strained by this naughty thing called the people. So he didn't like that, and clearly he was inspired both by Mussolini and especially by Mussolini and Stalin. Hitler, he was semi-inspired by up to a certain point in time, upon which things got a little bit dicier. But Hitler was described as the FDR of Germany, and they in the 1930s. This is Jonah Goldberg talks about this in his book Liberal Fascism, where American newspapers were talking about the German New Deal. That was basically what Hitler was doing in power. So everyone at the time saw that what FDR did with America and what Hitler did with Germany, those were basically the same types of policies. So it was a very strange time, but you can say that until you knew about the gulags and until you knew about all the crap that Hitler was doing, and until you knew about World War II and all of this, there was some legitimacy in saying that they didn't really know how bad it was. Of course, there was a lot of evasion in that, and the socialists in America did their best, like the New York Times. They went to Russia and covered up all the Gulag stuff and wrote about how wonderful the Soviet Union was and all that. And they got a Pulitzer Prize for basically whitewashing the regime of Stalin. And that Pulitzer Prize has never been rescinded. New York Times has never apologized for it. And so some people knew, but they added, by covering it up, they weren't like saying, now we're going to all socialists in the universe unite to cover up the evils of the Soviet Union. It was just an instinct, like a swarm instinct. If you think about the analogy with the locusts, every socialist had the instinct that I need to lie on behalf of socialism, because socialism are liars by propensity. They are thieves. So they tend to steal, they tend to be dishonest, they tend to be dictatorial. So their first instinct was to lie, to cover up.
Yeah, now we can point to Venezuela today and say, what are they doing about Venezuela today? Of course, they're ignoring it, or they're blaming it on America.
And look at what happened now that Mugabe died at age 95. The honest media wrote that he was the face of socialism in Africa. And he was a horrible dictator, which destroyed Zimbabwe, Venezuela style, before Venezuela did it, in the exact same way. Zimbabwe was called the breadbasket of Africa. They were exporting food to the rest of Africa.
Well, back when they were a British colony.
Well, even after that, like for a while, I mean, they were running on fumes.
For a while. Yes.
But then African socialist cronyism turned it into not the food basket, but a basket case.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a bread basket anymore. No. So the point is that you can say now, oh, all the socialists are sitting together on Skype and saying, what are we going to cover up today? But that would be M-type misintegration. That's not really what goes on. They have an instinct. We need to cover this up because this is bad for socialism. And all socialists think alike in this way. They have the same instinct because that's what socialists are. They're fundamentally dishonest, and they're fundamentally thieves at heart. So
now not only that, but do you remember that recently I did a little discussion about this guy that proposes that they're fundamentally violent as well, that the gulags and the concentration camps and the killing is not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah, I heard that. That was a crazy thing.
And while that furnace is going, and while we're killing and arresting people, that means that progress is being made and the good guys are winning.
There was an Antifa guy who just came out. He was an insider. He was an ex-Antifa. And he was on the inside, and he knew what Antifa was all about because he was in there. But he had a change of heart, and he came out and he told what is the driving force of Antifa. The Antifa are not ideological communists. They want to kill people. They want to bash people's head. And how can they do that in a legitimate way? Well, then they find out that communism and being so-called anti-racist is a way to be able to be violent and live out their violent dreams and get away with it. So they're not fundamentally ideologically convinced that this is like the wonderful thing. They want to have fun smashing things. That's why they're drawn to Antifa.
Yeah, that's what it reminds me of Ayn Rand's line where she said, where will the people come to run the gas chambers in dictatorships? They will smell it and they'll come out from under rocks. They will come.
Yeah, that's a very good visual way of explaining what's going on. And it's just like, well, think about it. Let's pick up on that analogy. If you put out a piece of rotting flesh in your garden, what happens in the span of just a few minutes?
It flies, right?
Yes, it looks like a conspiracy of flies.
Right?
But it's not. They're just following their smell. Now, so that's my point.
Very nice. They're just following the smell.
Yes. And so the smell is the same everywhere, and people who are attracted to that kind of smell act in unison. Not because of we're planning this together, but just because they all smell the same smell, and they react to it because that's their core instinct. Now, I think that most of what's going on is this kind of unison behavior due to smelling the same smell. Of course, they talk to each other, so it's like on the way to this rotting flesh, they might say, "Hey, look at that nice juicy flesh over there. Yeah, that's really nice." So on the way, they might start talking to each other, and they might find common ground, right? But it's not like the misintegration part here would say that you start with a lot of people who just get together in sort of like a big World Communist Congress on Skype to say, "What shall we do today?" No, it's self-organization based on common instincts, common values, and then along the way you get clustering. In fact, if you can do this, you can. I'm sure this would be brilliant to bring up on screen. If you search for maps, demographic maps of cities based on ethnicity, then you will see that no matter which city you look at in the world, they cluster according to ethnicity. So the Chinese live with Chinese, Hispanics live with Hispanics, whites live with whites, blacks live with blacks, Muslims live with Muslims, and so forth. Everywhere. Now, is that a conspiracy?
Excuse me. Let's see. Is it a conspiracy that people just get together in neighborhoods? I'll tell you what. When certain types of neighborhoods stop being homogenous in America, then we have something called flight from that neighborhood where they become homogenous again.
Is that a conspiracy? Are these people who fly away, are they talking to each other, coordinating this flight?
It doesn't seem that all of them are across decades, city after city, neighborhood after neighborhood, right?
And yet it just looks like it's a coordinated behavior, right?
It looks like it may as well be, yeah.
It's not, but it's coordinated behavior in the sense that they all share the same values, and they act accordingly, and therefore it looks like it's a conspiracy. Now they might be then one neighbor might say, "This neighborhood is turning bad. Yeah, I'm thinking about moving." But it's not is that a conspiracy that people talk about things that they share? No, it's just happened to have a value that they share and talk about with something that they are confident with, or that you don't have to talk about it. You're just saying, "Oh, this guy next door, he moved, right? So maybe I should do that too, because that seems like a good idea." Just think about all the mass shootings. Like, is that a conspiracy that when the media pumps up a mass shooter on TV and someone else gets a good idea, is there a conference of mass shooters who just decide together that now we're going to start go on a mass school shooting spree? No, they get inspired by each other. They see the behavior, and they imitate each other. So that there doesn't actually have to be communication in order for there to be some kind of semi-organized behavior.
Now,
So,
in the case of government incompetence, I want to look at that a little bit more, because these things are just an organic event, you're saying, in a lot of cases. They're not a centralized event. But
yeah, they're both. We can't ignore the fact that the Soviet Union actually had spies and actually did this.
Yeah, so I want to think a little bit on that. But so if governments are incompetent and yet they succeeded in infiltrating our education system and our media, so when I think about that, it looks to me like they were a diseased entity. They spread their disease out into the world, and then they themselves collapsed and died. And now their disease is moving through the rest of the world. And
Yes.
some areas of the world are going to be able to cope with that, and other areas like Venezuela are going to be swallowed by it and not be able to cope with it. But the disease is the Soviet disease.
Yes, and the disease is that you have the smell of rotting flesh, and which attracts the bugs. And so you don't actually have to have a lot of intelligence in order to have a very successful communist takeover. You just put in rotting flesh into the institution, and all the communists are going to come like flies to devour it, right?
And then good people will leave.
Yes, you will have flight. It's just like when what is this? It's not a theorem, but it's like a principle of bad money drives out good money.
Gresham's law.
Right? Gresham's law. That's it.
Yeah.
So under a system of force, when you have a fiat currency where you can actually by force put in bad money, then this drives out the good money. It flees away. You have flight. But the very moment you have voluntarism, people can choose, then good money drives out bad money. Right?
Yeah.
So all you need in order to have this disease spreading is force.
So that's
right?
why the TV media is taken over by the left, but the internet is owned by the right.
Yes.
Because where there's freedom, the right goes, and where there's force, the left goes. That's why the left owns the universities, and the right owns the various think tanks and the intellectual scene.
Yep, that's right. And our disadvantage is that we're not operating based on a centralized unit. There's some strength in unity, in strength in centralization. So we're acting. We're very hard to kill because you have to kill every single one of us because we're not acting in unison. So it's like herding cats or killing cats. It's very difficult. But at the same time, the disadvantage is that having an army of such cats that are not acting in unison is not very effective. So it's like we're sort of like a corrupting force against corruption in one sense. Like it's attacking corruption on all fronts. So it's very difficult for CNN and all of these to do their thing. So if we had some kind of central power, we would be very effective at using that. But of course, if we had that central power, we might not have the right ideas. So it's like it's a double-edged sword.
We might dismantle that central power if we had it.
Yeah,
we might work.
Right.
We might work feverishly to dismantle the central power if we had it.
Yes. So, but to get back to this notion that, like, Soviet Union obviously were, I mean, any government is acting in unison. I mean, there are people who are talking to each other, and they're acting in a conspiratorial way. So, but I wouldn't call that a conspiracy. That you have the CIA, that's not a conspiracy. We know about the CIA, and it's their job to conspire to act against foreign nations. So calling that like espionage and that kind of like work, calling that conspiracy theories is just abusing the term, in my opinion. Because we know that this occurs. I mean, they have budgets, right? So to say that, no, this is a conspiracy theory, that's like denying that the CIA exists. The job description of CIA is to conspire, but so it's not a secret, it's an open secret, so it's not really a conspiracy.
Yeah. Now, what everybody's worried about is 9/11 or Sandy Hook. Now, 9/11, I'm not worried about the towers. I'm worried about Building 7. What do you think about Building 7?
I've looked very much into that.
Are you pleased?
I'm very annoyed with all sorts of conspiracy theories regarding 9/11. And there's something that we don't understand about how these towers collapsed, these buildings collapsed. There is something we don't understand. But guess what? There's something we don't understand about really, really tall buildings and explosions and big fires. We don't really understand the sun. Like, I mean, physics is not a done deal. We can do small experiments that we understand pretty well. But once you start scaling things up, we just don't understand things. And one of the theories that is emerging now that World Trade Center 7 failed with is that when you heated up the beams in the World Trade 7, you got the bolts were actually pulled out by the heat. So you get twisting of the metal, so that the things that kept them together, the beams, they just came apart from the heat, which is different from melting it and so forth.
Well, and even if they got soft, they could bend. They don't have to completely break. They can bend, and that could cause it. But I'm worried about Building 7, which was separate. It's a 50-story, not a 100-story skyscraper. It's 50 stories, and it went down like the next day or 2 days later or something like that.
No. It went the same day.
Was it the same day?
3 or 4. Yeah, 3 or 4 hours later. Mm. And what happened is that you had these spires piercing through the building. Like, imagine you have like 50 or 100-meter long iron bars, and they're piercing through the building, kapow, and like going through many floors, weakening it, and then you have raging fires throughout the whole building. And what happens is that you can see, there's a famous video where you can see it collapsing. And when you see it collapsing, there are many conspiracy theories that cut the first 6 seconds of that collapse. Because when you look at the first 6 seconds of the collapse, you see that it collapses first on the inside.
Yeah.
So on the top of the building, there's like a little a room on top of the building, and first you see it disappearing into the building on the top, and then you can see some windows cracking here and there, not in an explosion, but this one pops in a random pattern, and this goes on for 6 seconds, where you see the whole building went first like this, and after 6 seconds, in the top windows, you can now see that there are no floors there. You can see the sky through this window. You can see that the inside is an empty shell. And on the seismic data, you can see that there was something going on inside that building for 6 seconds. And then, zoom, it just falls down. So it was an empty shell that fell down. But they say, oh, it was demolition, blah, blah, blah. No, it was not a demolition. It was an internal structural collapse, and after that, the empty shell just fell down after the rest of the building. So it can be explained. It's just a little bit difficult to do it. And the same goes with like the Pentagon building and all of that. It's very easy to say, what about this? What about that? I mean, we have to keep in mind that when something bad happens, there are not like 3D cameras everywhere recording every single thing. We have like a mobile camera here and a mobile camera there, and it's like we don't have complete information. So it's absolutely unreasonable for us to be able to create a model in detail of how a building collapses, because that's literally first time in the history that something like that has happened. So there's going to be some free variables, because The alternative is to say that we know in detail with no unknown variables how a large-scale building and collapse under extreme heat works. And we just don't know that. That's outside the models. And we have an example of this. Like today, you have the same people who are claiming now that we know everything about the climate. So we have this computer model, and we just put in things, and now look at what happens. We have global warming. And then you say, well, what about clouds? Oh, we don't have the resolution to be able to deal with climate at the level of clouds. We just don't understand clouds. But hello, clouds make up like 5 times the forcing of human-made CO2. So we have an uncertainty in clouds that is 5 times greater than our CO2 emissions. And then it's like that just includes the unknown, the known unknowns. I mean, what was this? The guy under Bush, the known knowns, unknown knowns. Who was that guy?
We have a known Rumsfeld.
Rumsfeld, yeah. He was. People laughed at him, but he was actually saying it absolutely right.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
Because there are known unknowns. That's called risk. That's called like mapped out probabilities. So known unknowns is what insurance companies deal with, right? And then there are these out of left field things that we don't know about, the unknown unknowns. And we don't know what we don't know. So we don't know how big the unknown unknowns are. So we can't really make any numbers on that. We just know that there are things we don't know. And we have no idea how much we don't know, which is a big problem because you can't say like 70% of what we know, 70% of this topic is unknown because we don't know how much we don't know. And the same goes with buildings. Like we have some primitive buildings where we are wildly simplifying how a beam works under certain temperature conditions. And then we're saying, now we know everything there is to know about it. There is one researcher who has shown some really, really weird patterns of behavior in the collapse of World Trade Center 1 and 2. I forget the name of that researcher. I think it's a woman. And she notices that there are substances of unknown substances in the rubble of World Trade Center 1 and 2, which you normally will not find in that kind of building. And they indicate some kind of fusion reaction or fission.
What?
Yes. So there's some kind of nuclear reaction going on there. And then she shows pictures of you have a car in the street where half of the car is like partially melted, but the other half of the car is not touched. So she said this looks like a form of radiation burn on the car, but it's directional, so it only hit half of the car. So, and when I looked at that, as I'm a physicist, so I can actually judge these things. And the picture she showed and the measurement she showed is really weird. Now, she just turned immediately to conspiracy, like there was an energy weapon at work. I say, well, how about that's just unknown physics? There are things we don't know about physics. Like for years there has been going on these measurements of cold fusion, right? And this was dismissed as just a fluke, and so there's someone made something up. But the fact of the matter is that the whole cold fusion thing, there are things there that they measured that is real that we don't know what is. It doesn't have to be cold fusion, but it's just unknown physics. And that's not something new. I mean, new physics pops up all the time. So I've been following the people who are working on like the electric universe model, like the electric sun model, and there are these people working on trying to emulate what's going on with the sun and with plasma physics, and they're basically having this iron ball, and they're massively pumping it with electricity, causing like a plasma ball. And they're getting like very strange nuclear reactions in that thing. They're not supposed to get those nuclear reactions. But all of a sudden, at very low energies, they're producing massive amount of energy, and they're finding elements that wasn't in there before the experiment, that was created in situ, inside the chamber. Now, is that a conspiracy or a secret energy weapon? No. It just might be unknown physics. So I'm perfectly open to the possibility that there's weird physics going on in the World Trade Center event and the collapse, that you get nuclear reactions in there. I'm perfectly open to that possibility.
That's off my map. I don't know what that's all about.
No, but my point is, it's infinitely more probable that it's unknown physics than that it's some vast conspiracy of people who were able to sneak into the building and put little charges there while no one noticed.
Yeah, the idea that the government could successfully pull off a conspiracy strains credulity, for sure.
Yes, because, I mean, that's what they're doing there, if that was a conspiracy, is basically to try to do a Hollywood movie live. Now, doing it non-live is hard enough. I mean, and then you have to have many action scenes that take action takes, because you rarely get it right the first time, so you have to have many times running. But here we're saying that they basically made a Hollywood movie live, on the fly, flawlessly. What's the odds that a government, an incompetent government, is capable of doing what no one in Hollywood is capable of doing?
I don't know. They killed MLK, right?
Well, that's easy, right? That's doing stuff like that. But a bullet is easy to do, and like whether who killed MLK, we don't know. But like someone shooting someone, that's easy. Like that's not very hard. But take for instance JFK. If we're going to go full conspiracy theory, I'll go with JFK.
All right.
JFK is the only conspiracy theory as a young man I was drawn into after seeing the movie JFK. You remember the movie JFK?
I never saw it.
Well, basically, then it was Oliver Stone. He was pushing this CIA military complex angle, and I thought in that movie he presented a very good case for the magic bullet theory, blah blah blah. That there were many shooters, blah, all of these things, and when I saw that movie, I was like, of course this is correct. Afterwards, I learned that Oliver Stone was a communist, and that he didn't like the fact that the shooter was a communist. And no communist likes that. They just want to cover that up. So they don't want a communist to be the one who shot their liberal idol JFK, right?
Yeah.
Because that doesn't fit their narrative. So it has to be the evil right-wing NRA military complex. That's the one who did it, right?
Yeah.
For some reason.
Yeah.
Evil right-wingers. So then I looked in. Then there was a guy, an objectivist in Norway, who said, "I've been looking into all sorts of conspiracy theories. It's my hobby, and I've gone in with open eyes, trying open mind, and every single time, the case for debunking is so strong when you just look at the evidence." And there was this litigator in America who made he actually also made a documentary about this and a book where he litigated the case against this. What's the shooter's name?
Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, Lee Harvey Oswald. It was like litigated the case. He had a jury, and his goal was to present the best possible case, and he had like a defense lawyer who was also a very good litigator, or a defense lawyer who was pushing the other the conspiracy theory, and in that mock trial, he was able to get the jury to say that no, it was Lee Harvey Oswald. It's a clear case. He would have been convicted in that trial. So that was actually quite impressive. So I started looking into that, and when I saw the evidence, I was like, "Oh my goodness, there's something going on here that's like is strange behavior." But the case that there was only one shooter is like solid. And in fact, after I read this book or looked into this book, in 2005 or something like that, there was a guy who was so tired of this conspiracy theory with JFK. He said, fuck it, I'm going to take the Zapruder film frame by frame. I'm going to go to Dallas, get the sketches of the buildings, and I'm going to build a freaking 3D model of the whole thing. He built a 3D model of the car, and he built a 3D model of little JFK and all the senator who was in the front of the seat. And frame by freaking frame, he recreated the whole scene. And then he identified the exact frame where the senator was shot. And the way he noticed this, he said that the magic bullet theory is wrong because the senator pointed to the wrong frame when he was shot. But we can see in the movie when the senator was shot. And we see it because he has a jacket, and the jacket flips up at the exact point when the bullet exits from his chest. So we know exactly the frame when the bullet went out. And then he says, most people think that that Kennedy was here and this senator was here, and therefore the bullet had to sort of move in a strange pattern. No, when you actually look at the car, the senator was sitting here, and the Kennedy was sitting here, and Kennedy was sitting higher up. He was sitting sort of lower down than Kennedy. Was elevated. So when you look at it from the side, the bullet could have gone like if he looked at here's where the bullet exited from the senator, and he knew where it entered. So he just continued the path. Where would that bullet go if you just take a straight line? And it went through the head of Kennedy, right? So he could, and then said, okay, now this, I don't even need a magic bullet. It goes through his head. And then he said, okay, if I now add some physics to this and trace the path of the parabola of this, the bullet back, I know exactly the frame, I know exactly the spot in the street where this bullet came from, and I know exactly which direction it came from based on that it went through the senator, exited his chest, and that it went into the back of the head of JFK. Where do I go? Where will this bullet start from if I just trace it back to where it came from? And where does it go? It traces perfectly to the window of Lee Harvey Oswald. And if you're going to say that Now that's a conspiracy that they were just planning that 50 years later they were going to make a 3D movie to recreate this. No. The guy who shot JFK did it from the window that Lee Harvey Oswald had his rifle. So it was Lee Harvey Oswald, and you don't need a conspiracy. Now, that's like a slam dunk. You can't get any better than that. So if you just search on YouTube, it's worth watching the whole thing. You don't have to do it now, but like JFK and 3D model or something like that, it'll pop up as one of the recreations of that. And that's like one of the most profound rebuttals of a conspiracy theories I've ever seen. You can't get any more rebutting than that. That's like total rebuttal.
All right, here's my last conspiracy theory. A nurse from the local hospital calls a radio station to discuss the fact that they had gotten ready with fluids and stuff for at least several victims to come in from a mass shooting. And it was a small town, so they didn't have a lot of different hospitals, but all the hospitals were getting ready for an influx of patients that never came. And watching the news coverage, you might think that a line of ambulances would be coming out with 24 victims, but this line of ambulances never came. Why would that? That was Sandy Hook. Why would that be the case? And in fact, she says that the nurse says it's very strange because if somebody dies at a local nursing home, they bring them to the hospital to be declared dead. And then they're declared dead at the hospital. So why, in this case, did that not happen? And could maybe some of those victims have been saved if they would have been gotten to hospitals? Possibly?
I have not looked into the Sandy Hook theory at all.
All right. Just put it on your radar. I'm very, very displeased with it.
I'm perfectly like the general rule when it comes to conspiracies is the smaller the conspiracy is, involving the fewer people, and the smaller in scope it is, both in time and in space, the more likely conspiracy is. So, for instance, one very obvious contender for conspiracy theory these days is the Jeffrey Epstein suicide. That has like conspiracy written all over it. However, it doesn't have to be quite the conspiracy you think it is. He might have killed himself, but he might have paid the guards to sleep. He might have paid the guard to take away the cameras.
Or something like this, yeah.
So that he could use an actual rope, not like this paper thing. And then when they find him, they take the rope away and put this the paper around his neck or something like that.
That would take a very brave man in America, because that'd be tampering with the crime scene, and that'd get you 10 or 20 years in prison. So,
well, it only takes two people watching this thing, the guards, and if they suddenly get like $1 million in their accounts, are you willing to take the chance for $1 million?
Right.
So, yes, it could be a conspiracy, but it doesn't actually have to be the kind of conspiracy that you think it is. Because if he was actually afraid of dying, he would have put a dead man switch in place. He didn't.
Okay, now to bring it to Facebook and Google and YouTube. Conspiracy or no conspiracy?
Well, they're certainly acting as if they were infiltrated by China. Definitely. Like, if you just ask the question, if China infiltrated all of these corporations, would they actually act differently than they do now?
Seems probably not. They would try to censor the side they don't like vigorously, clumsily.
So there's a funny like a sketch out there. It's absolutely hilarious. It takes about or talks about there are two British guys. I forget what they called. It's the same guys who had this skit, the skit with the Nazis, the SS. Are we the baddies? They were like, we have skulls as our emblem. Are we the baddies, Johan? But they also had a skit about conspiracy theories, and it's absolutely priceless. One of them is of the moon landing, and they go through well, it's actually we need to build a rocket to go to the moon. Why? I thought that we were not doing that. Well, people are going to ask, how did you get to the moon? Well, we have to say we went up into that big rocket you saw. So we're not going to save any money on that. Are we? No, we're not. But we're going to save money on catering, right? No, actually not, because we're probably going to need more catering for the crew, the film crew, than actually sending 3 people to the moon. So, Lisa, in the end, like, how about we go to the moon and fake the moon landing there, and then the other one said, fake the fake moon landing. What if people ever found out? And the other one says, it's just a chance we'll have to take. And then there's the Diana conspiracy theory. So it's we'll pay a guy to have like a drunk and convince Diana not to wear seat belts, and like this we have this and they're going through the whole thing, and then they finally get a call and said, we're calling off the conspiracy. That actually happened. So it's funny. It's like they were planning this ridiculous conspiracy, and then it actually happened. So they don't actually have to go through with exactly the same plan. And that's the point. Just because something looks like a conspiracy, it can actually just be random events. When I play pool with my dad, I say, if I try to do that shot, if I actually plan to do that shot, I would not ever be able to do that in a million years. Because when I shoot, something goes in just weird random ways, and something weird falls into a pocket, and there's just no way I could have planned that. But this happens fairly frequently, that incredibly improbable events happen, right? So if I try to recreate exactly the shot I did, I can stand here all night. I will never be able to do it. But yet, every night, some completely improbable event occurs when we're playing pool. And we have this standing joke, like, I could never recreate that. I would never be able to do that if I tried to. So the point is, it's like there are these random events occurring all the time, and some of them are parodically similar to conspiracy theories. It's like, it just happens that things look like they were a conspiracy when they're just bad luck. And so you can't never attribute to conspiracy what can be explained by incompetence and randomness, right?
So if we were going to respond to a conspiracy, it occurs to me that our response wouldn't be materially different whether we thought it was a conspiracy or just like random cultural, like let's say we're responding to the conspiracy of infiltration of Google and Facebook by lefties. So whether it's a conspiracy or it's just cultural garbage we're facing, either way, we're going to go about it basically the same. We're going to have to figure out a better set of ideas to believe in and practice, and we're going to have to find the people who don't agree with that and take them out of power, either by depriving them of business or charging them with treason if they're in the government or whatever it is.
That's the correct way to think about it. If you can't prove a conspiracy, that doesn't mean that you just have to accept that things just, there's no pattern to behavior. You can still go about treating it in the exact same way, as you would treat a conspiracy. And also, in the case of, like, even if it's not the Chinese, it may not be treason in the direct sense, but it's indirectly treason, and it's certainly fraud. Like Facebook and Google and YouTube, they presented themselves as platforms, as neutral arbiters of free speech, right? And they attracted a bunch of conservatives, and they built up their sites on the fraud, on the swindle that they were not that they were a free speech platform. That's fraud, because they were not. When they have earned all this money, then they say, "Aha, we're now going to use all the money that all those evil conservatives gave us to screw all those evil conservatives." Yeah. If they had been honest and said up front that they hate conservatives and they're going to use their power to destroy the world, then they might not have gotten all those conservative customers, right? So it's fraud. Now, some nitpick would say, it's not fraud because on page 75 of the end-user license agreement, they said that we can do anything we want and change the blah, blah, something like that. And to them, I say, watch the South Park episode with the human and sent iPad. Have you seen that episode?
Human sent iPad.
Sent iPad, not the centipede. Do you know this? The horror movie, The Human Centipede? Basically, the human centipede is like a crazy guy who takes 3 people and he saws the mouth of one person into the ass of another, and then he saws the mouth of a third one into his ass, so that the food has to pass through all 3 of them. It's like really disgusting. And South Park did this with Steve Jobs' Apple. Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs has placed into the end user license agreement on page 72 that if you click OK, then you can be part of a human sent iPad experiment. And so they come to South Park and pick up one of these people. These guys in South Park, and he's you clicked on the end user license agreement, so you have to agree to this now. You have to participate in the human sent iPad experiment, and he's trying to make it read. My God, why can't it read? And so he's trying to get these humans to read the end user license agreement. This is Steve Jobs then. So he sews them together like in this horror movie, and then the first guy is like an Asian guy, and then and he says, "No, I will not eat. I will not eat." And then he gives him a taco. "Oh, I'm sorry. I cannot resist. I will have to have the taco." So he has the taco, and it's very gross, but it's very, very funny. So the whole point of this South Park episode is that, is it actually okay that you have a 75-page end user license agreement and you just click OK, just get to the program, and then someone later can say, "Well, you have now agreed that I can take your kidney."
Right.
Like, is that okay? No, it's not okay. It's not okay that you can be part of a human sent iPad experiment and have your mouth sawed into someone's anus. That's not okay. And and by the same token, it's not okay that on page 72 it says that now you can, even though we said that this was a free speech platform, everything can change and we can just censor everyone we want. That's not okay. It's still fraud. It's not okay. And therefore, I think that there's a good legal case based on, like, it's an impossible standard for people to read a huge end-user license agreement, and it should be based on like common sense things. Like you can't put in things there, like if it's like crazy stuff that people wouldn't normally agree to, you can't put it on behind a wall of texts, right? So I think there's a good fraud case against Facebook and all of these. So we can push that regardless of whether it's the Chinese who have infiltrated or whether it's the communists from Soviet Union who infiltrated the academia, who trained Mark Zuckerberg and all the people who are now at Facebook. We don't care. The action is still the same, right?
Yeah. Maybe we should have a committee on un-American activities and 2 levels of charges, and 1 level of charges will be aiding and abetting the enemy, and the other level of charges will be people that have actually contacted an enemy. That'll be foreign agents, and they'll be charged more seriously. But, they did this once in Hollywood. They went through Hollywood and rooted out the communists and stuff. So, and Ayn Rand testified for that.
Yeah, the effect was that they cleaned up about 10% of the communists for 5 years.
Yeah.
And then it was back to normal again, right?
Yeah.
So,
and then it got worse than ever. Probably there's no real cure for it except for freedom. And probably we're always going to have some group of collectivists nipping at our heels one way or the other, and just freedom of speech so that we can talk about it, and freedom of guns so we can fight if it comes down to it. That's probably all we can really hope to have, I think. I don't know.
I think that there are people going down this path now about platforms. If you want to be a platform, then you have to be neutral, blah blah blah, something like that. Whereas if you want to be able to censor people, you can do that, but then you have to be an editorialized paper or something like that, and therefore you can be sued for everything that is on your editorialized platform. Yeah. I know that Rucka is not happy about that.
I don't know why, though. Do you know why? I don't get why he's unhappy. I mean,
because free speech, right? Because you can do whatever you want with your property.
Yeah. He's unhappy about Prager University suing them because it's free speech and they can do whatever they want. But the law there's a contractual law that either they can edit what's on their platform or they can't edit what's on their platform. And they seem to be not doing that law. So
yeah.
Does Rucka not understand the dynamics of this, or is he just an absolutist? Doesn't matter, it's their property, they can do whatever they want? What do you think's going on with him there?
This is anarchism. People don't understand this. Like, if you look at the history of the left consisted of the liberals, which basically is now us, and the anarchists and the socialists. That was the original left in Europe. And for a while in the 19th century, the anarchists, especially in France, did a lot of crazy stuff and made a mark. But then they went away. They disappeared. And so everyone thinks that they're gone. But that's not what happened. What happened is that the left said, the socialists, the statist socialists says, yeah, we love the state, but why should we give up anarchism just because we love the state? Why not both? So we're using anarchist techniques that are outside of the state, that whenever it's their team who has the state, we're acting like anarchists to destroy the state from outside. But when we have the state, we're statists, and we're hitting hard down on them. and we're using totalitarian techniques. So they're just assholes and bastards, and they're using every single technique that is available to them to destroy freedom. So whatever works. If they have statism at their hand, they'll put people in gulags. If they don't have that, well, they'll have Antifa or something similar.
Or Google or YouTube. They'll capture Google or YouTube, and
or they'll take the academia, and then they'll start to call illegal immigrants undocumented immigrants. That's anarchism, right? They're saying we don't accept this law because we disagree with the law. And since we disagree with the law, we are now in anarchist mode, right? We're saying this law doesn't exist because we say so. I know it's the law, but I don't accept it because I disagree with it. So now I'm not going to call it illegal immigrants. I'm going to call it undocumented immigrants because no human is illegal. Yeah, like crazy stuff like that. And so when Rocca says that he's against this PragerU trial or lawsuit, he's saying he doesn't accept the law. So therefore he goes into anarchist mode.
I see. Now, presumably, we would have some sort of law there. If we didn't have this incorrect law, we would have some sort of a law there, presumably. So I don't see why we shouldn't. I mean, what's so egregious about the law as we have it?
I don't think it's very egregious.
It just requires that you declare what sort of publishing you're doing, or what sort of, are you just running a public billboard, anybody can stick what they want up there, or are you declaring that you are responsible for the stuff that they're sticking up there and it's your stuff? I think, I mean, maybe it's a false dichotomy and it shouldn't exist, but it's not that big of an...
No, I have a great difficulty understanding what's the difficulty with that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a paper and you publish stuff, who is liable for that? If you say something egregious or something like that, can some people sue you? That's a very real issue. And if you have editorial rights, you say, I approve this message, then you can be sued for that, right?
Yeah, our newspaper can, but Google and Facebook can't because they're not publishers, they're platforms. So.
But that's the point. The point they're saying is that we are now getting a protection from being sued because we're saying we're not approving of the message. But in order to get that, they can't at the same time say, well, it's not our message, but we just sort of shaped the message a little bit because we're removing the stuff we don't like, but it's not our message, so we can't be sued. Yeah. So, okay. But what's wrong with that? It's not an ideal solution, but it's not a horrible thing. I don't understand what's so horrible about that. They can do whatever they want with their property, but if they're using their property in a way that's they want to avoid lawsuits and they're getting some kind of a deal in return for that, what's so bad about that? I can't really get myself worked up about that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, this is something that I'm really annoyed about. People talk about, oh, everyone can do with whatever they want with their property, except if you have 5 neighbors around you, can they all of a sudden decide you can't get out of your property? We're blocking you from crossing across our property like that. Now, objectivists would say that that's an unrealistic example. That would actually never happen because when you buy a house, you would make sure that you have free passage so that you can get out and so forth. Okay, but what if it's a 75-page end-user license agreement? On page 72, it says this can be changed at any time. And what if one day you post something on Facebook, and then all of a sudden your internet connection is severed, your bank account is closed. You can never ever open any bank account ever in any place in America. Your electricity goes out, and you can't get car insurance anymore. Like all of a sudden, the entire corporate world is conspiring against you. Credit cards is out. You can't get a loan. You can't get a job. And like, okay, is that force? Or like, at what point does this start approaching this I'm being fenced in by my neighbors scenario?
Yeah, right. Like I've got freedom to do everything except move and leave my house.
Yes.
Like I've got freedom to say whatever I want, but if I do say whatever I want, I'll lose my job and I'll lose my banking privileges. And so that sounds like a lot like freedom of speech in Soviet Russia. You could say whatever you want in Soviet Russia. You just couldn't get paper to say it, and you couldn't say it to your neighbor, and you couldn't say it to your friends, and you couldn't say it in the workplace. But as long as you didn't say it to anybody and didn't write it down, you could say whatever you wanted.
Yes, so they want sort of Soviet-style free speech. And I'm saying that, okay, at least we should have that discussion that once we're getting so large technologies that are so huge in scope, like the entire internet, that you can be depersoned. You can simply cease to exist based on what happens online.
Based on their opinion of you.
Yes, and you can be like I know people for various reasons who now cannot get a job. I have a friend who was recently fired from a very good job based on like a smear campaign by the left. So he was painted as some kind of a Nazi guy. It's wrong, but it was in the papers. And since it was in the papers, now he's a persona non grata. He can never get a job again, ever.
Hmm. Yeah,
so, at what point does this sort of go from being that's something you do with your property over to becoming a virtual prison?
It's reaching that point. I mean, the point comes pretty soon, in my opinion. I mean, holy cow! And is it
so
worse?
What I'm saying is that instead of like actually discussing exactly where that line is going, let's say that we're making sort of in this blanket or the carpet of private property, let's make sure that there are some pathways through there so that even if you have surrounded by private property on all sides, there's still some ways for you to move through all those private properties. And that should also not apply just to physical property, but also to electronic property, like Facebook. Like, is there the way I'm seeing it, this when you're saying that if you want to be a free speech platform, you get certain privileges. That privilege comes with you have to make a pathway through there for free speech. Like there are certain things you can't do. Like you can't discriminate. You can't set up roadblocks so that you are virtually fencing someone in.
Yeah, I would say that they could take down stuff for pornographic and vulgarity purposes, and that's that. If they go beyond that, then you could sue them for monetary damages in a court of law. We'd ought to be able to. We ought to be able to say, you took my page down just because you don't like my content, and now it's costing me, $1,000 a month or whatever I was making before to 10,000. Some of these channels are big and make a lot of money. So I think they should be able to sue for damages. Louder with Crowder and stuff. I think they should sue for damage, and I think they should be able to get it.
So here's what I propose for this, is that rather than having this, letting everyone say whatever they want, they should make some categories. Just like we have for content, movie contents, we have rated R, rated PG, and so forth. And on Google, the default setting for Google search is family friendly. So you can't get the porn. by just searching for something. So you can safely search for like water sports without having like a shock, visual shock to your eyes. And that's a good thing, right? We don't want to have that. The default settings are okay, because so you can say that Facebook can say our default setting is that we have family friendly, porn is not allowed, or like this kind, and we have civil discourse. That's you can't call people horrible things, and you can check the progressive civil. That can even be a default setting, that like you're not allowed to say racist things and blah 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 like that. But that's your default setting, right? It should be possible for you to get the X-rated Facebook posts. Right. They're saying like if it's a platform, anything should be possible to post there, but it can be the privilege of Facebook to say we have filters and we have default settings, and you have to physically enable certain filters. And if they're transparent about those filters, then it's not. They're not actually being dishonest. You know exactly what's being filtered. And if you want to go in and look at each of the filter settings, then you can say that, oh my goodness, in this politically neutral blah blah blah, what this means is that they have a list of things you can't say. You say, oh, you can't say that you like Trump, and then you say, what the hell, like. So then it becomes much more transparent, and at the same time, Facebook and Google and all of these can actually do some filtering.
So you would require them to keep porn or whatever on there. You would only allow them to filter it out.
Well, actually, yeah. When you say it like that, yes, I think that. They would have to very specifically say, just like you could have a men's club, only men allowed, they would have to very specifically say the things that are excluded. And it should be not on page 72 of their OILM. It should be like, this site does not allow, and here's the list of things that are not allowed.
Well, I think they have that, don't they? And like community guidelines and stuff. So yes, I think Prager University is going to court using that, saying you're taking down videos about morality and the U.S. Constitution and etc. And where does that violate your community guidelines?
Yes.
So I think that's already what they've got in place. They're just not being faithful to it. I mean, they're saying, here's our community guidelines, and then they're taking down whatever they want. Trump stuff, anything they want, conservative stuff, and they're just saying it violated our community guidelines.
Yeah. So that's okay. I have no problem if that's what their take on it is, that they're not following their own community guidelines. That's actually a very good case, most likely.
I hope so.
What I'm saying is that it's not enough to just have a 75-page community guideline.
Right.
It has to be transparent, and you can't have that with 75 pages. So the community guideline can't be more than just a one visual page. You can't scroll on the community guidelines. You have to summarize within one screen what is allowed and what's not allowed.
And do we have to put it in plain language? There was actually a movement to make language plain at one time.
It has to be plain.
Well, I'm in favor of it. I don't know how to enforce it. We'd have to have bureaucrats enforce what is plain language.
The plain language movement.
I can't think of a bureaucrat saying, this language is not plain enough, make it more understandable. I can't think of a bureaucrat doing it.
That is just so counterintuitive on so many levels. It just tickles my brains in all the wrong places. Yeah. So, but that would be some kind of filter function, like I just outlined. That would probably be okay. And what I think would be okay is that like Scott Adams had one suggestion, which I think is okay, is that um, to begin with, when you get a feed, you can get, for instance, the things that you might want to filter out in a different color, so that offensive language is marked perhaps red by Twitter when in the feed, and then you can easily say, "Oh, I don't like those red things. Turn off all the red messages," and then it will filter them out. And then you just have a few things that are by default set off, like porn and like very offensive language, something like that. Because I think that the very idea that you should have like a complex community guideline goes against the very notion of a platform. Platforms are by definition transparent, and it's not transparent if you have to have a long end user license agreement.
Yeah, so we should get it summarized a bit. I definitely agree with that. I mean, we've had things like you can't have too long of a thing to sign when you go to a car shop and stuff. They can have you sign a certain amount of stuff, but not too much, and stuff like that. So we probably need to move in that direction with the electronic universe as well.
So here's something that I have been thinking about for a long time. Are you familiar with declaratory law?
Declaratory, I don't know exactly what you mean by that, no.
I don't. That may be just like a Norwegian term or an international term, but what it means, declaratory law, is that it's default setting, default law. So, for you say that when nothing else is said, then this applies. This law applies, but you can override it by a contract.
Okay, interesting concept. I don't know exactly what it is, though.
We have it built into our system already. For instance, by default, you don't want to be killed. But if we have euthanasia legal, that would be like a declaratory law. If euthanasia is legal, then it means that you can override this "don't kill me" default law.
Right, okay.
But then, because it's a very gross violation, you have to have a very strong contract to overriding. It's hard to override that. So the grosser the violation, the stronger evidence you need for overturning that default setting. So for euthanasia, you have to have it's not okay to just sign your paper somewhere and then on page 75 it says I can kill you, like that.
I'm very worried about euthanasia in countries with socialized healthcare. I don't know if it's going to be a problem in free countries, but
I have just one comment on that. Fits like a glove.
Yeah, exactly. Because they look at the cost: $600 to put him down, $65,000 to keep him alive. I think we'll put him down.
We actually, in Norway, a few years ago, we had a debate about that, where the Labour Party said that the increasing welfare costs due to people living longer and the sickness coming at old age means that we now should consider introducing death committees. And they used the term death committee, and they did that only once. Then they stopped using the term. But in fact, they actually do have death committees. So the bureaucrats decide who gets to live and die. That's what you have to do in a welfare state, where you have to limit resource usages. Yeah. So if you're above a certain age, you don't get the treatment for this and that, right?
All right.
But it's free, but you can't get it if you're older than so and so. Yes, fits like a glove. Fits like a glove. But okay, so the default setting thing. The interesting thing about that is that actually has some place in society where you can say that we want the lawmakers to put in place default settings that protect the typical user. So, like the default, if you don't say anything, You can have a very short agreement. You might not even have an agreement at all. Imagine that you have a declarative law for free speech. If you sign on to a platform, if it says platform, there's an entire body of what that means behind the scenes, and you don't have to specify it, because by default that means you can't on page 75 have this and this thing. It's specified, and if you want to deviate away from the declaratory law, then you have to specify that very specifically.
What would be the deviation? That they can censor porn and offensive stuff?
Well, it depends. It might be that may be part of the default setting. The default setting might be that the public space, it's like I'm a public space, then you know that in public spaces you can't go nude, you can't show porn, you can't crap on someone's floor, like some basic stuff like that. And that goes also for the digital public spaces. So going nude would be like showing nude pictures or porn, something like that. So you have basically these decency standards that apply everywhere else in society. Like when you don't have to actually specify that when you go into a restaurant, you have to have clothes on. That's a default setting, right? So, but if imagine like you had on pay before you have to go into a restaurant, you have to sign an end user license agreement, and on page 72 it says that if you're not nude, that you will automatically be charged $900. Now that's basically fraudulent, because you're lying by omission, by hiding, by lack of transparency, right? Fraud by lack of transparency. And so the default settings helps you, just guide you that you can coast and surf through society, and you're not going to do something stupid, because the default settings are basically on your side. And if you're going to do something really stupid, you have to be very explicit about it. Like, now you're about to do something completely insanely idiotic. Here's what you do. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Like in games, you are about to use your secret potion. Are you sure you want to do this? That's like the default setting is that you don't do that. And it works in games. Like, I've been saved many times by exactly this thing, when I have some kind of like secret thing that I don't want to use. And the default setting is that you probably want to be absolutely sure that you want to use this.
Yeah, I'm thinking of autopilot now. The default setting should be no autopilot. And are you absolutely sure you want to drive into the back of a fire engine on the freeway? Precisely.
So I like this idea of default settings into law. And that body of declaratory law would be different from like natural rights. You have your natural rights, but then you have some sort of like a common consensus about what do we actually agree on. So, for instance, example: if you're going to buy coffee from McDonald's, it's probably going to be hot. That's the default setting.
Right.
And the default setting, and you're building this into common law, is that unless something else is said, common sense applies. That's your default setting. And then you make it like, if you go to court, you can actually specify, is it common sense that coffee is hot? Yes, it is. But now in America, you have this thing where it's not common sense that you shouldn't put your pet into the microwave oven. So you have all these weird things, and that's because there's something horribly wrong with American law. I think that the default setting should be that common sense applies, and you shouldn't have to specify things for incredibly stupid people like that, because Darwin Awards applies, so to speak. If you don't know that microwaves are not a good place to put your pets, then, well, maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's not common sense. I don't know.
Some people don't know how microwaves work, so maybe to them it's reasonable.
Yes. So, but I really do like the default setting because it can get us out of a lot of troubles, not just with electronics stuff, but with just like basic issues in society. You like default settings, and one of the default setting is that if you don't put a note on your chest, it doesn't mean that you can go kill them. Like, you don't have to put up a note saying, I don't want to be killed. The default setting is that unless you say something, you probably don't want to get killed. You really have to specify that. And so you already have these default setting in place in many areas, but I just want to expand that into making into a more systematic way of approaching law.
Well, I'm definitely in favor of simplifying and making it more accessible to the layman, which has been a battle that goes on for centuries.
Well, I think that there should probably be a law in place in the Constitution saying something along the line that civil laws should never exceed more than what a very stupid person in society can know and remember and understand.
Yeah, it should be in the common vernacular or the common tongue or something like that.
So it should probably not be more than 100 laws in total, something like that, of civil laws.
Well, I think laws are going to be. There's going to be a lot more laws and a lot more complex laws in a consensual society. Because, I mean, in a Soviet society, they don't have any law about gas stations, but in a consensual society, we're going to have laws about your gas can't fume off too much because the neighbors would get sick, and you have to, you cannot take shipments between midnight and 4 a.m. because it makes too much noise, and so we're going to have a lot more laws in a free society than in a controlled society. I think we're going to have a lot of laws.
I'm not sure exactly how to solve that. I'm running very low on batteries now, so I have to end the conversation about now in just 5 minutes.
All right, we've been going for a while, so it's a good time to draw a line, I guess.
Yeah, but this I want to pick up on this topic at a later point, because this notion of how to solve how many laws we should have in society, that's a very good topic, because how much of it should be solved by general principles, general laws. Like, you should probably know, like, don't do things that makes a lot of troubles for other people, but a little bit more specific like that. Don't break the peace.
Yeah.
Something like that. And then you can specify it, and the specifications can be one sub-level down. And you probably then have that the specifications can be quite multitude, but not the general principles. The 100 laws should be reserved for the more general case. And then you just specify it in each domain what exactly that means in various cases.
Yeah. Yeah, like with green lasers, we didn't have a law about green lasers, but now we have a law that you can't shine them into a cockpit of an airplane. But the reason for that is because of the danger to people's lives and stuff. So the general overall principle hasn't changed. We've just discovered that we need a little subclause that says anybody caught with a laser near the end of the airport runway is in big trouble.
Yes, something along the line of that. And the thing is, I'm not sure that this should be a law. I think that there's something fundamentally wrong with the whole way we structure law. Because basically law is paper technology, or even like, what's it called? cuneiform
Uh-huh.
cuneiform technology. That's basically what we have today. We're scribbling things on sticks, on the rocks. That's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
We have electronic systems now. We can change. Now I'm falling away now. So
Okay.
I'm
We'll start on law next time.
yeah.
All right. Bye-bye, Onar.
Bye bye.
There we are, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoy what I do, please go to Patreon. Send me 10, 20, 50 bucks a month and help me build this channel up and do regular interviews, maybe talk to some bigger and bigger people, and more important interviews, and get some of these questions straightened out that we're dealing with around here. Mr. Cropper out.